Welcome to True.
Life of Our Ancestors. Introduction: The Dawn of Human Mastery. 70,000 years ago, our ancestors walked a vastly different Earth. The world was locked in the grip of an ice age, sea levels were dramatically lower, and massive ice sheets covered much of the northern hemisphere. Modern humans, Homo sapiens, had already evolved in Africa, and were beginning their epic journey across the globe. These weren't primitive cave dwellers stumbling through existence. They were sophisticated hunters, skilled craftspeople, and resourceful survivors, who had developed remarkable abilities that allowed them to thrive in some of the harshest environments our planet has ever known. This is their story, a story of courage, ingenuity, struggle, and survival. A story that explains why we are here today, carrying in our genes and our minds the legacy of those who came before us. Chapter 1: The World They Inhabited. A Planet in Transition. The Earth of 70,000 years ago was a world both familiar and alien. The continents occupied roughly the same positions as today, but the climate was dramatically different. Global temperatures averaged several degrees cooler than our modern world. Ice sheets, some more than a mile thick, covered vast stretches of North America, Europe, and Asia. So much water was locked in these glaciers that sea levels dropped by as much as 400 feet below present levels, exposing land bridges and coastal plains that are now submerged beneath the oceans. Africa, the homeland of our species, was experiencing profound climatic shifts. The Sahara, which we know today as the world's largest hot desert, underwent cycles of greening and drying. During wetter periods, it transformed into a savanna dotted with lakes and rivers, teeming with game. During dry periods, it became an almost impenetrable barrier that channeled human migration along coastal routes and river valleys. In Europe and Asia, where some human populations had already ventured, the landscape was dominated by vast steppes, tundra, and boreal forests. Massive herds of now extinct megafauna roamed these lands: woolly mammoths with their curved tusks reaching toward the sky, woolly rhinoceros, giant elk with antlers spanning 12 feet, cave bears larger than modern grizzlies, and saber-toothed cats that stalked the shadows. The ecosystem and its challenges. Our ancestors didn't just live in this world, they were part of its intricate web of life. They competed with other apex predators for prey and territory. Cave lions, hyenas, wolves, and leopards all presented constant dangers. Every day brought the possibility of becoming prey rather than predator, a reality that shaped every aspect of human behavior and social organization. Water sources were life itself. Rivers, lakes, and seasonal water holes dictated migration patterns for both humans and animals. Our ancestors learned to read the land, to know where water could be found even in the driest seasons. They understood that where water gathered, prey would follow, and where prey congregated, predators would lurk. The vegetation varied dramatically, depending on location and season. In tropical and subtropical regions, ancestors gathered fruits, nuts, roots, and honey. In temperate zones, they harvested berries, seeds, and edible plants during the brief summers, knowing they had to prepare for long, brutal winters when plant food became scarce or impossible to find. Chapter 2: The Anatomy of a Hunter. Built for the chase, natural selection had sculpted the human body into a remarkable hunting machine over millions of years. Unlike their prey, humans couldn't outrun most animals in a sprint. A human's top speed of about 15–20 miles per hour pales in comparison to a deer's 40 miles per hour, or a gazelle's 60 miles per hour burst speed. But humans possessed something far more valuable: endurance. Our ancestors were persistence hunters, capable of running for hours under the scorching sun. While four-legged animals must pant to cool down, and panting prevents them from running at the same time, humans could sweat. Our nearly hairless bodies, covered with millions of sweat glands, allowed continuous cooling while running. This seemingly simple adaptation proved revolutionary. A human could chase an antelope for hours, not matching its speed, but never letting it rest. Eventually, the animal would collapse from heat exhaustion, and the persistent human would claim their prize. The human body featured other crucial hunting adaptations. Our bipedal stance freed the hands for carrying weapons and tools. Our shoulders, unique among primates, could rotate through a full range of motion, allowing powerful, accurate throwing. Archaeological evidence suggests that even 70,000 years ago, humans could throw spears and rocks with deadly accuracy at distances up to 30 yards. This ability to kill from a distance was a game changer, allowing humans to hunt dangerous animals while minimizing personal risk. Our eyes, positioned at the front of our heads, provided excellent depth perception, crucial for judging distances when throwing or striking. Our relatively large brains, consuming 20% of our body's energy despite making up only 2% of our body weight, could process complex information, plan strategies, and learn from experience. The mind of a hunter. Physical adaptations were only part of the equation. The human mind, that 3-pound universe enclosed in bone, was the ultimate hunting tool. Our ancestors possessed cognitive abilities that set them apart from all other predators. They could engage in abstract thinking, imagining scenarios that hadn't yet occurred. Before a hunt, they could visualize the chase, anticipate the prey's reactions, and plan accordingly. They could remember the locations of water holes, the migration patterns of herds, and the behavior of different animals in various situations. Language, probably already well developed 70,000 years ago, allowed hunters to share information, coordinate complex group activities, and pass knowledge from generation to generation. An elder who had hunted mammoths for 40 years could describe techniques to young hunters who had never seen one. Stories around the fire weren't just entertainment, they were survival manuals, encoding crucial information about animal behavior, dangerous situations, and successful strategies. Our ancestors could also read tracks like we read books. A depression in the mud told them what animal had passed, how large it was, how long ago, whether it was healthy or injured, and where it was heading. They could identify hundreds of different plants and know which were nutritious, which were medicinal, and which were deadly. They understood animal behavior, predicting when herds would migrate, where predators would hunt, and how prey would react to threats. Chapter 3. The Art of Big Game Hunting. Mammoth Hunters. Confronting Giants. Imagine standing at the edge of a snow-covered plain, watching a herd of woolly mammoths emerge from the morning mist. Each adult stands 13 feet tall at the shoulder and weighs 10 tons, with curved tusks that could impale a human with a casual toss of the head. Their thick, shaggy coats protect them from temperatures that drop to -40 degrees. These are among the most dangerous animals on Earth, yet our ancestors hunted them successfully. Mammoth hunting required careful planning, courage, and cooperation. A lone hunter stood no chance against such a beast, but a group of 20 or 30 humans, armed with knowledge, tools, and coordinated tactics, could bring down even these giants. The hunt often began days in advance with scouting. Hunters would track herds, looking for vulnerable individuals, the very young, the very old, the sick, or the injured. A healthy adult mammoth in its prime was avoided when possible. The risk was too great, and easier prey was usually available. But sometimes, when food was scarce, or a mammoth wandered too close to the camp, the tribe had no choice but to attempt the dangerous hunt. The preferred method involved driving the chosen animal into a trap. Hunters would identify natural features that could be used to their advantage: cliffs, ravines, bogs, or narrow valleys. Then, with shouting, thrown rocks, and burning branches, they would panic the animal, driving it toward the trap. If they could stampede the mammoth over a cliff or into a bog where it would become trapped, the most dangerous part of the hunt was over. But sometimes there were no cliffs or bogs, and the hunters had to confront their prey directly. They would surround the animal, keeping just out of reach of its tusks and trunk. Younger, faster hunters would dart in, jabbing with spears, then retreat before the mammoth could react. The goal wasn't to kill quickly, but to inflict multiple wounds that would gradually weaken the animal through blood loss and exhaustion. This could take hours. The mammoth would charge repeatedly, and hunters would be injured or killed. But the humans would persist, working as a team, rotating fresh hunters, and while exhausted ones rested. Eventually, the massive animal would begin to slow, weakened by its wounds. The hunters would move in closer, targeting vital areas: the belly, the throat, behind the front legs where the heart lay protected by layers of fat and muscle. When the mammoth finally fell, the real work began. The tribe would butcher the carcass as quickly as possible before other predators arrived to claim the kill. A single mammoth provided an enormous amount of meat, enough to feed a tribe of 50 people for weeks. The fat, especially precious in cold climates, would be rendered and stored. The bones would be used for tools, shelters, and fuel. The hide would become clothing and shelter material. The tusks would be carved into weapons and art. Nothing was wasted. Bison and aurochs. The buffalo jumps. In regions where bison and aurochs roamed, our ancestors developed another sophisticated hunting technique, the buffalo jump. These massive cattle, standing 6 feet tall at the shoulder and weighing up to 2,000 pounds, traveled in herds that could number in the thousands. Hunters would spend days preparing for a buffalo jump. They would identify a suitable cliff, usually 30 to 100 feet high, with a relatively flat approach. Then they would construct a funnel system using stones and brush, creating drive lanes that channeled the herd toward the cliff edge. On the day of the hunt, the entire tribe participated. People would position themselves along the drive lanes, hiding behind rocks and brush. Other hunters would circle behind the herd. At a signal, everyone would leap up, shouting and waving hides, creating a wall of noise and movement. The startled bison would run, and the drive lanes would funnel them toward the cliff. The lead animals, seeing the cliff too late, would try to stop, but the mass of the herd behind them would push them forward. Dozens of bison would plunge over the edge, many dying from the fall, others injured and unable to escape. Hunters waiting at the base of the cliff would finish off the survivors with spears and stones. A successful buffalo jump could provide meat for months. Like with mammoths, every part of the animal would be used. Meat would be cut into strips and dried in the sun or smoked to create jerky that could last through the winter. Hides would be scraped, treated, and softened to create clothing and shelter. Bones would become tools. Sinew would be dried and used as cord or thread. Even the stomach would be cleaned and used as a water container. Hunting smaller game, deer, antelope, and wild boar. Not every hunt targeted massive megafauna. In fact, most hunting focused on medium-sized game, deer, antelope, wild boar, and similar animals. These hunts required different skills, but were no less challenging. Deer and antelope, with their acute senses and incredible speed, could detect a hunter from hundreds of yards away. Our ancestors had to become masters of stealth, learning to move silently through any terrain, to use wind direction to avoid detection, and to read the subtle body language that indicated whether an animal was relaxed or alert. Ambush hunting was common. Hunters would identify game trails, places where animals regularly passed while moving between feeding and watering areas. They would conceal themselves nearby, sometimes for hours, waiting in absolute stillness. When prey appeared, they would wait for the perfect moment, then strike with spear or arrow, aiming for the heart or lungs to ensure a quick kill. Wild boar hunting was particularly dangerous. These animals, weighing up to 400 pounds and armed with razor-sharp tusks, were aggressive when cornered or wounded. A boar could charge at 25 miles per hour and would not hesitate to attack humans. Many hunters bore scars from boar tusks. Some died from injuries sustained in these hunts. Yet boars were valuable prey, providing not just meat and hide, but also fat that could be rendered into lard, an invaluable cooking and preservation resource. Dogs, domesticated from wolves probably 20,000 to 40,000 years ago, may have already been helping human hunters 70,000 years ago, though this remains debated among archaeologists. If present, they would have been invaluable for tracking game, cornering prey, and alerting hunters to danger. The partnership between humans and dogs would become one of the most successful interspecies collaborations in history. Chapter 4: Masters of the Water, Coastal Fishing and Shell Gathering. While big game hunting captures our imagination, our ancestors were equally skilled at exploiting aquatic resources. Archaeological evidence from 70,000 years ago shows that coastal populations were sophisticated maritime foragers, gathering shellfish and catching fish with impressive efficiency. The coastline of 70,000 years ago looked very different from today. With sea levels much lower, vast stretches of continental shelf were exposed, creating broad coastal plains that have since been submerged. Our ancestors lived on these now drowned landscapes, leaving behind middens, shell deposits that mark their campsites. Shellfish gathering required no elaborate technology, just knowledge and effort. At low tide, beaches, rocky shores, and tidal pools would be exposed, revealing abundant food. Mussels, clams, oysters, limpets, periwinkles, and crabs. Women, children, and elders could participate in this activity, making it a reliable food source that required less risk than hunting large game. But shellfish provided more than just calories. They offered complete nutrition, protein, omega-3 fatty acids crucial for brain development, and minerals like iron, zinc, and iodine. Some researchers believe that the exploitation of coastal resources, particularly shellfish rich in omega-3s, played a crucial role in human brain development and cognitive evolution. Our ancestors knew which shellfish were safe to eat and which were poisonous. They understood tidal patterns and knew when the best gathering opportunities would occur. They developed tools for prying shellfish from rocks and digging clams from sand. They learned to cook shellfish over fires, which not only made them more palatable, but also killed the parasites and bacteria. Spearfishing and trapping. Moving beyond passive shellfish gathering, our ancestors developed active fishing techniques. Spearfishing in shallow water was probably one of the earliest methods. A hunter would wade into the water, spear poised, waiting with perfect stillness for fish to swim within range. Then, with a quick thrust, they would impale their prey. This required remarkable skill. Water refracts light, making fish appear in a different position than they actually occupy. Our ancestors had to learn to compensate for this optical illusion, aiming not where the fish appeared to be, but where it actually was. They had to strike with lightning speed, faster than the fish could react and dart away. In rivers and streams, our ancestors built fish traps and weirs. Using stones, they would construct V-shaped walls that funneled fish into narrow openings where basket traps waited. These traps would be checked daily, providing a steady supply of fish with minimal effort. During spawning runs, when fish like salmon moved upstream in massive numbers, these traps could capture hundreds of fish in a single day. Hunting the giants of the deep. Perhaps the most impressive aquatic hunting involved large fish and marine mammals. Archaeological sites from South Africa, dating to around 70,000 years ago, contain remains of large fish species that live in deep water, suggesting that our ancestors were capable of some form of deep water fishing. Catching tuna, which can weigh 300 pounds, or groupers, which can exceed 500 pounds, would have required sophisticated technology. Our ancestors probably used harpoons, spears with detachable heads connected to cordage made from plant fibers or animal sinew. When a large fish was struck, the harpoon head would remain embedded in the fish while the shaft floated away. The hunter would hold onto the line, letting the fish tire itself through repeated runs, then gradually hauling it closer, much like modern hand-line fishing. Seals and sea lions, which hauled out on beaches to rest and breed, were also hunted. These animals provided rich meat, dense blubber for oil and lamps, and waterproof hides ideal for making watercraft and clothing. Hunting them required careful stalking, as seals on land are nervous and quick to retreat to the water. Hunters would approach from downwind, moving slowly, often crawling on their bellies. If they could get close enough, a well-thrown spear or club could dispatch a seal before it reached the safety of the waves. There's even evidence that some coastal populations were hunting small whales and dolphins. When these animals beached themselves, either due to sickness, injury, or navigational errors, they became bonanzas of meat and blubber. Some groups may have learned to drive small whales into shallow water where they could be killed, though this remains speculative for such ancient times. Chapter 5. The Technology of Survival. Stone Tools. The Foundation. Every successful hunt began with tools, and for our ancestors 70,000 years ago, that meant stone tools. The technology of stone tool making, called lithic technology, had been refined over hundreds of thousands of years. By this time, humans had mastered sophisticated techniques that produced razor-sharp, specialized tools. The process began with selecting the right stone. Flint, obsidian, and chert were prized for their properties. They were hard enough to hold an edge, yet brittle enough to fracture in predictable ways when struck. A skilled napper could look at a stone and see within it the tools waiting to be released. Creating a stone tool required knowledge, skill, and patience. The napper would strike the stone core with another stone, or antler hammer, removing flakes in a precise sequence. Each strike had to be placed exactly right, with the correct angle and force. A mistake could ruin hours of work, but in skilled hands, a single stone core could yield dozens of sharp flakes, each one a cutting tool or a component of a composite weapon. The tools produced were remarkably diverse. Hand axes served as general-purpose cutting and chopping tools. Scrapers, with their steep working edges, were used to clean hides and work wood. Burins, with their strong chisel-like points, carved bone and antler. Points, carefully shaped and thinned, were hafted onto spears, creating deadly hunting weapons. The most sophisticated stone tools of this period were crafted using the Levallois technique, a method that involved preparing a stone core so that a single strike would remove a flake of predetermined shape and size. This represented advanced planning and understanding of three-dimensional geometry. These Levallois flakes were often turned into exquisite spear points, some so finely made they could only have been created by master craftspeople who had spent years perfecting their skill. Wooden tools and weapons. Stone gets the most attention from archaeologists because it preserves well, but wood was probably even more important in daily life. Wood is organic and rarely survives 70,000 years, but when conditions are right and wooden artifacts are preserved, they reveal the sophistication of ancient woodworking. Spears were the primary hunting weapon. The earliest were simply sharpened wooden stakes, fire-hardened to increase durability. Later, humans learned to attach stone points to wooden shafts using natural adhesives made from tree resins mixed with beeswax or animal fat. The point would be fitted into a slot carved in the shaft, bound with sinew or plant cordage, and sealed with adhesive. These composite spears were far more effective than simple wooden ones, as the stone point could penetrate thick hides and had a longer useful life. Some spears were designed for throwing, lighter and balanced for maximum distance and accuracy. Others were thrusting spears, heavier and more robust, designed to be driven into prey at close range. A hunter might carry several spears of different types, selecting the appropriate one based on the hunting situation. Digging sticks, used to excavate roots and tubers, were simple but essential tools. A fire-hardened wooden point could penetrate hard soil and lever out even deeply buried roots. These tools, primarily used by women and children, provided a significant portion of the diet in many environments. Wooden traps were probably common, though none survive from this period. Deadfalls, snares, and pit traps could be constructed from wood and cordage, allowing our ancestors to catch game without constant active hunting. A well-placed trapline could provide a steady trickle of small game with minimal effort. Fire, the ultimate tool. Of all the technologies our ancestors mastered, fire was the most transformative. By 70,000 years ago, humans had been controlling fire for perhaps 300,000 years or more. They didn't just use fire, they had achieved complete mastery over it. Creating fire on demand required skill and the right materials. The most common method was friction-based, rapidly rotating a wooden stick against a wooden base to create enough heat to ignite tinder. The wood had to be dry and of specific types. The tinder, made from shredded bark, dried grass, or certain fungi, had to be properly prepared and absolutely dry. Even with ideal conditions and proper technique, starting a fire could take 15 to 30 minutes of sustained effort. Because fire starting was difficult and time-consuming, our ancestors went to great lengths to keep fires burning. Someone in the group would be responsible for feeding the fire, ensuring it never went out. When the group moved camp, they would carry embers in special containers, perhaps a shell filled with moss or a hollowed piece of wood, allowing them to start a new fire quickly at the next location. Fire transformed human life in countless ways. It provided warmth, allowing humans to survive in cold climates that would otherwise be lethal. It provided light, extending the active day beyond sunset and keeping predators at bay during dark nights. It cooked food, making it more digestible and safer by killing parasites and bacteria. Cooking also made many otherwise inedible or toxic plants safe to eat, dramatically expanding the range of foods available. Fire was also a hunting tool. Our ancestors used it to drive game toward waiting hunters or traps. They used it to clear underbrush, improving visibility and making certain areas more attractive to grazing animals. They may have used fire to harden wooden tools, and to help in stone tool making, as heat treatment can improve the flaking properties of certain stones. Beyond practical applications, fire was a social center. The hearth was where the tribe gathered, where stories were told, where elders taught the young, where strategies were planned, and where bonds were strengthened. Fire made humans human in ways that go beyond mere survival. Chapter 6: Daily Life and Social Structure. A day in the life. Dawn arrived cold and gray. The camp stirred slowly, people emerging from their shelters, simple constructions of branches, hides, and perhaps stones arranged in windbreaks. The fire, tended through the night, was rekindled and fed with fresh wood. Breakfast was whatever was available. Leftovers from the previous day's hunt, perhaps some dried meat or fish. Berries gathered the day before, roots roasted in the coals. Food security was never guaranteed. Some days brought abundance, others brought hunger. Our ancestors lived with uncertainty as their constant companion. The hunters, adult men primarily, but sometimes including particularly skilled women, gathered to discuss the day's plans. Had anyone seen tracks? Where had the herd been spotted yesterday? Was it worth pursuing, or should they focus on smaller game or fishing? These decisions were made collectively, with experienced hunters having more influence, but everyone able to contribute. Meanwhile, women, often accompanied by children and elders, prepared for a gathering expedition. They collected baskets or carrying bags and took digging sticks, knives, and containers. Their destination might be a grove of nut trees, a patch of edible roots, or a fruit-bearing area. This work was crucial. In many environments, gathered plant foods provided more calories than hunted meat, and children weren't idle. Young ones stayed close to their mothers, but older children had responsibilities. Boys practiced with toy spears, learning the skills they would need as hunters. Girls learned to identify plants, to process hides, to make cordage and baskets. Play and work blended together as children absorbed the knowledge they would need to survive as adults. The day would pass in constant activity. Hunters might track game for hours, or they might return empty-handed. Gatherers would return with bags full of plant foods, shellfish, or small animals caught opportunistically. Back at camp, people would process the day's harvest, cleaning and butchering game, sorting and preparing plant foods, working on ongoing projects like making new tools or clothing. Late afternoon would bring a period of intense activity as people prepared the evening meal. Food would be cooked over fires, stones might be heated and dropped into skin bags filled with water to create primitive stew pots. The camp would fill with the smells of cooking food, smoke, and the everyday aromas of human habitation. Evening was social time. After eating, people would gather around fires. This was when stories were told, when elders taught, when the tribe bonded. Someone might work on making tools while others talked. A craftsperson might carve a piece of bone into a needle, or work on a piece of jewelry. Children would listen to stories, learning the tribe's history, memorizing crucial information about hunting techniques and animal behavior, and absorbing the cultural knowledge that defined their people. As darkness deepened and the fire burned low, people would retreat to their shelters for sleep, knowing that tomorrow would bring the same challenges, the same uncertainties, the same daily struggle to survive in a world that offered no guarantees. Social organization, the tribe. Our ancestors 70,000 years ago lived in relatively small groups, probably ranging from 25 to 150 individuals. These weren't random collections of people, but carefully structured social units, usually based on extended family relationships. The tribe was everything. It was safety in a dangerous world, where a person alone would quickly perish. It was an economic unit, sharing resources and labor. It was a school, where knowledge was transmitted. It was entertainment and emotional support. Belonging to a strong, cohesive tribe was the difference between life and death. Leadership in these groups was probably informal and based on achievement rather than inheritance. The best hunter might lead hunting expeditions. The most knowledgeable elder might guide decisions about when to move camp or where to find food during difficult times. A particularly wise or charismatic individual might serve as a general leader, but their authority would be based on respect and consent rather than coercion. Decision-making was probably largely communal. Important decisions, like when to move to a new location or whether to attempt a dangerous hunt, would be discussed by the entire group. Everyone's input would be heard, though the opinions of experienced adults would carry more weight than those of children or young adults. Gender roles existed, but were probably more flexible than in later agricultural societies. Men generally focused on hunting large game, while women focused on gathering and caring for children. But these weren't rigid divisions. Women certainly knew how to hunt, and would do so when necessary. Men would gather plant foods when opportunity arose. Survival required everyone to be adaptable. Child rearing and education. Children were precious in a world where survival was never certain. Infant mortality was high. Perhaps 1/3 to 1/2 of children died before reaching adulthood. Those who survived received intensive care and education. Infants stayed close to their mothers, nursed for several years, and were carried everywhere in slings or carriers. This constant physical contact created strong bonds and gave children a sense of security. Young children were rarely alone. There was always someone watching them, keeping them safe from the countless dangers of the prehistoric world. Education began early and was constant. Children learned by observation and imitation, watching adults perform tasks and gradually participating as their skills developed. A 4-year-old might help gather easily identified plants. A 7-year-old might help process hides or tend fires. A 10-year-old might accompany hunters, carrying supplies and learning by watching. By age 12 or 14, young people were contributing significantly to the tribe's survival. Elders played a crucial educational role. Too old for strenuous hunting or gathering, they nevertheless possessed decades of accumulated knowledge. They could identify hundreds of plants and animals, knew the stories and techniques passed down through generations, and could teach young people the skills they needed to survive. A tribe's elders were its living library, and their loss was catastrophic. Conflict and cooperation. Life wasn't always harmonious. Disputes arose over food distribution, personal slights, or romantic interests. How our ancestors handled conflict was crucial to group survival. Within the tribe, mechanisms existed to resolve disputes before they escalated. Public discussion, where grievances could be aired and solutions negotiated, probably served this function. Social pressure, including ridicule or temporary ostracism, could modify unacceptable behavior. In extreme cases, an individual who consistently violated group norms might be expelled, a punishment that was often tantamount to a death sentence, in a world where survival alone was nearly impossible. Between tribes, relationships were more complex. Neighboring groups might be allies, trading goods, sharing information, and occasionally intermarrying. These relationships helped maintain genetic diversity and created networks of mutual support during difficult times. When one tribe experienced hardship, they might seek temporary refuge with allies. But tribes could also be competitors or enemies, especially when resources were scarce. Territorial disputes could lead to violence. Archaeological evidence from this period includes some individuals who died from wounds that appear to have been inflicted by other humans. Warfare, if it existed, was probably small-scale raiding rather than the organized conflict of later periods, but it was still deadly and traumatic. Chapter 7. The Struggles and Hardships. The ever-present threat of starvation. Perhaps the greatest struggle our ancestors faced was simply getting enough to eat. Food security was never guaranteed. A successful hunt might provide abundance for days or even weeks, but it could be followed by days or longer when little or no food could be found. Starvation was a real and recurring threat during winter in northern latitudes, when plant foods were unavailable and game was scarce, or had migrated to warmer areas. People would slowly starve. They would consume their body fat reserves, then muscle tissue, growing progressively weaker. Children and elders were most vulnerable, but even strong adults could die during severe food shortages. The psychological toll of constant food insecurity was immense. Our ancestors lived with anxiety about where the next meal would come from, knowing that a few bad days of hunting or gathering could mean death for themselves or their children. This anxiety drove much of their behavior, their constant movement following game and plant food, their willingness to take risks, hunting dangerous animals, their careful hoarding of any surplus food. When food was available, people ate as much as they could, knowing famine might be coming. This feast or famine pattern shaped human metabolism. Our bodies evolved to store excess calories as fat, a trait that served our ancestors well, but causes health problems in modern environments where food is constantly available. Disease and injury. Without modern medicine, every injury and illness was potentially fatal. A simple cut could become infected and lead to blood poisoning and death. A broken bone that didn't heal properly could leave someone crippled, unable to contribute to the tribe's survival, and thus facing a slow death from starvation or being left behind when the tribe moved. Diseases were constant companions. Parasites from eating undercooked meat or contaminated water caused chronic health problems. Respiratory infections, especially in cold climates, killed many. Dental problems, common even in archaeological remains, caused constant pain and difficulty eating. Some evidence suggests our ancestors attempted to treat injuries and illnesses. Certain plants had medicinal properties, and knowledge of these would have been carefully guarded and transmitted. Broken bones show signs of having been set and splinted. Some skulls show evidence of trepanation, holes deliberately cut into the skull, perhaps to relieve pressure from head injuries. The survival of these individuals proves someone cared for them during recovery. Yet for all their efforts, death from injury and disease was common. Life expectancy was probably around 35 years, though those who survived childhood had a reasonable chance of living into their 50s or even 60s. Everyone lived with pain and disability to some degree, arthritis from years of physical labor, old injuries that never properly healed, and chronic infections were simply part of life. The dangers of predation. Humans were not the unchallenged apex predators they would eventually become. Our ancestors shared their world with formidable carnivores that saw humans as potential prey. Cave lions, larger than modern African lions, hunted the same game as humans, and sometimes hunted humans themselves. Hyenas, operating in packs, could chase humans away from kills and would attack vulnerable individuals. Leopards were stealthy ambush predators that could snatch a person in seconds. Cave bears, occupying the same shelters humans sought, were aggressive when disturbed. Most dangerous were attacks on children. A moment of inattention could allow a predator to snatch a child from the edge of camp. This threat meant children could never wander far from adults, and that someone always had to be watchful. Many archaeological sites show evidence of carnivore activity, including gnawed human bones, testament to times when predators succeeded. At night, predators were even more dangerous. Darkness belonged to animals with better night vision than humans. Even with fire for protection, nighttime was anxious. Watching eyes might reflect firelight from the darkness. Strange sounds could signal a predator's approach. People slept lightly, ready to rouse at any alarm. Environmental hazards. Beyond predators, the environment itself was dangerous. Cold killed, and not slowly. Exposure to freezing temperatures could cause hypothermia and death within hours. Frostbite could claim fingers, toes, ears, and noses, leaving people maimed and less able to survive. Heat was equally dangerous in different environments. Dehydration could kill quickly in hot, dry climates. Our ancestors had to know where to find water, how to conserve it, and how to recognize the signs of dehydration before it became fatal. Natural disasters struck without warning. Floods could sweep away camps and people. Wildfires, especially during dry seasons, could trap people, forcing them to run for their lives or perish in the flames. Lightning strikes killed people and started fires. Earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and tsunamis all claimed victims. The psychological burden. Beyond physical hardships, our ancestors endured immense psychological stress. The constant uncertainty, the ever-present danger, the loss of children and loved ones, all took a toll on mental health. Grief was a constant companion. Children died in infancy. Hunters didn't return from expeditions. Elders weakened and passed away. The death of a mother left young children vulnerable. The loss of experienced hunters weakened the tribe's ability to acquire food. Yet our ancestors had to continue. They couldn't afford prolonged periods of depression or despair. The tribe depended on everyone's contribution. This need to persevere despite trauma probably shaped human psychology, creating resilience, but also mechanisms for processing grief quickly and moving forward.